Coralie Pemberton didn't know that the man sitting on the edge of the kingdom's well at midnight was the most powerful wolf in the realm. She didn't know that the worn leather jacket he wore was chosen specifically because it had no crest, no insignia, nothing that would mark him as anything more than a man who couldn't sleep. And she didn't know that when he looked up at the sound of her footsteps on the garden path, the expression that crossed his face, startled, unguarded, almost reverent, was the expression of someone who had just heard the answer to a prayer he hadn't finished speaking. All Coralie knew was that someone was sitting in her spot. The kingdom's well stood at the center of the walled garden, an ancient circle of mossy stone in the heart of the capital, older than the palace it bordered and older than the bloodline that ruled from it. The garden had been public once, centuries ago, open to anyone who wanted to walk its paths or toss a copper into the water and whisper something they were too afraid to say out loud. But the walls had crumbled in places, and the flower beds had gone wild, and the iron gate hung crooked on its hinges, and over time the people of the capital had simply stopped coming. Coralie had not stopped coming. She came every night. Had for the past 3 months, ever since the fire took her bindery and everything in it. Her press, her inks, her tools, 17 years of her father's work and 4 years of her own, all of it reduced to char and wet ash on a Tuesday morning while she stood in the street, with soot on her face and nothing in her hands. She'd rebuilt. Of course she had. She'd found a smaller space 2 streets over and purchased second-hand tools and started taking commissions again, because that was what you did. You rebuilt. You kept going. You pressed your grief into something flat and manageable and tucked it between the pages of your days like a dried flower you didn't want anyone to see. But at night, when the work was done and the silence of her rooms pressed in, Coralie walked to the walled garden and sat on the edge of the well and made a wish. The same wish. Every night. She didn't believe it would come true. That wasn't the point. The point was that saying it out loud, even in a whisper, even to water and stone and the overgrown bones of a garden no one tended, made the wanting feel less like a wound and more like a direction. Tonight, though, someone was already there. He sat on the far side of the well with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and in the thin moonlight she could see the shape of him. Tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark bronze-brown hair that fell slightly too long across his forehead and past his ears, as though he'd forgotten to have it cut or simply stopped caring about it. He wore a plain leather jacket over a dark shirt. No ornamentation, no jewelry. His boots were good quality but scuffed. He looked, she thought, like a man who had come here to be no one for a while. He looked up when she stopped at the edge of the path. Pauses. "Sorry," Coralie said. "I didn't think anyone else. I can come back." "No." He straightened. His voice was low, slightly rough, as though he hadn't spoken in hours. "Please, there's room." There was room. The well was wide enough for 4 people to sit along its rim without touching. That was precisely the problem. Sitting at a well in the dark with a stranger was not the kind of decision a woman made without calculating the exits first. He seemed to understand this. He shifted to the far edge, leaving the entire near side open, and turned his gaze back to the water. A deliberate offering of space. Coralie sat down. The stone was cool through the fabric of her skirt. She folded her hands in her lap, ink-stained fingers, always ink-stained, no amount of scrubbing ever fully removed it, and looked down into the well. The water was dark and still. Moonlight caught its surface like a held breath. Neither of them spoke. It should have been uncomfortable. 2 strangers sitting in a ruined garden in the middle of the night, close enough to hear each other breathe. But the silence between them had a texture to it, soft and unhurried, like the silence between pages in a book you were in no rush to finish. Coralie felt something in her chest ease, not disappear. Ease. After a long time, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a copper coin. She held it over the water. "I come here every night," she said quietly. Not to him exactly, to the well, to the ritual. I make a wish. She dropped the coin. It hit the water with a sound like a single note plucked on a string, and the ripples spread outward in slow, concentric rings. She heard him exhale. So do I, he said. She looked at him. Really looked, for the first time. His eyes were deep smoke gray, the color of a sky threatening rain, and they held hers with an expression she couldn't name. Not curiosity, not interest. Something closer to recognition, as though he had been expecting her and hadn't known it until she arrived. The air between them changed, just slightly. Just enough that Coralie became aware of her own pulse, the way it quickened when his gaze didn't waver. "What do you wish for?" she asked. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile, the beginning of one, abandoned before it could fully form. Same thing, every night. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. They sat with that for a while. The night sounds of the garden pressed in, crickets, the rustle of something small moving through the overgrown beds, the distant murmur of the city beyond the walls. Somewhere above them, an owl called and was answered. "I should go," Coralie said, though she didn't move. "Will you come back tomorrow?" The question landed like a stone in still water. She should have said no. She should have said she didn't make midnight appointments with strangers in abandoned gardens. She should have been sensible. "Probably," she said. She came back. He was already there. Same spot, same worn leather jacket, same quiet watchfulness that made her feel simultaneously seen and unhurried. He'd brought something this time, a small paper bag that he set on the stone between them without comment. She opened it. 2 pastries from the bakery on Larkspur Street, still faintly warm. "You don't even know my name," she said. "You don't know mine either." "Coralie?" He paused. Something flickered in those smoke-gray eyes. Hesitation, she thought, though she couldn't imagine why. "Alden," he said. "Alden." She turned the name over in her mouth. It fit him. Simple, solid, slightly old-fashioned. "Why do you come here, Alden?" He looked at the well. His jaw worked once, a small, involuntary motion, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. Quieter, stripped of something. "My mother used to bring me here when I was young, before the garden closed. She said the well was older than any kingdom and that if you told it the truth, it would remember for you." He paused. "She's been gone 11 years. This is the closest I can get to talking to her." The ache in his voice was careful, controlled. The kind of grief that had been carried so long it had worn smooth around the edges like a stone in a river. Coralie's hands tightened in her lap. "My father," she said. 4 years ago. He was a bookbinder. I inherited the trade and the shop. And then I lost the shop too." She stopped, breathed. "I come here because it's the only place that doesn't expect anything from me. I can just want things, without having to justify them." Alden turned toward her. The moonlight caught the angles of his face. Sharp jaw, strong nose, the faint shadow of stubble along his cheeks. And she noticed for the first time that he was handsome. Not in the polished, deliberate way of men who knew their own appeal. In the way of someone whose face had been shaped by weather and feeling, and not enough sleep. "What do you want?" he asked. No one had asked her that in a very long time. Not what do you need, not what can you afford. What do you want? "I want my work to matter," she said. "I want to bind something that outlasts me. I want—" Her voice caught, and she pressed her lips together hard. Voice breaks. "I want to stop feeling like I'm rebuilding alone." The well was silent. The garden was silent. And then Alden reached across the stone between them and laid his hand palm up on the rim. Not touching her. Offering. She stared at his hand. Large. Capable. With calluses across the palm and a thin scar along the base of his thumb. Not the hand of a nobleman. The hand of someone who worked. She placed her fingers in his. The moment their skin touched, something happened that Coralie could not explain. At the base of the well, in the cracks between the old stones where nothing had grown in years, a tendril of green unfurled. Tiny, delicate, impossibly alive. A shoot of something. Ivy, she thought. Or honeysuckle, pushing up through the gap and reaching toward the moonlight with the slow, deliberate certainty of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Coralie's breath caught. "Did you see?" "Yes." His voice was strange, thick. She looked at him. His eyes were fixed on the green tendril, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen before. Not recognition, not grief. Something closer to wonder. Something closer to fear. He pulled his hand back. The tendril stopped growing. "I should go," he said. And he was on his feet before she could respond, already moving toward the garden gate, already putting distance between himself and the small, impossible thing that had pushed its way into the light. Coralie sat alone in the garden and stared at the green shoot growing from the stones. She came back the next night anyway. So did he. They didn't mention the plant. They talked about books instead. She told him about the commission she was rebuilding, the particular satisfaction of a clean fold, the smell of leather and linen and paste. He listened the way people rarely listened, with his whole body angled toward her, asking questions that proved he'd actually heard her. He told her about his work, carefully. He managed things, he said, complicated things, people and logistics and problems that had no clean solutions. He liked the work but hated the loneliness of it, the way decisions sat on his shoulders like stones and no one asked if he was tired. On the third night, he asked about her hands. "They're always stained," he said, not critically, observationally. The way someone might notice the grain in a piece of wood or the patina on an old coin. Coralie spread her fingers, blue-black ink in the creases of her knuckles, a fading rust-colored stain along the side of her palm from the iron gall she mixed herself. "Occupational hazard. My father's hands looked the same. Worse, actually. He used to say clean hands meant an empty workshop. He sounds like someone I would have liked. He would have been suspicious of you." "Why?" "Because you listen too carefully. He'd have said no man listens like that unless he wants something." Alden was quiet for a moment. "Does it concern you? That I listen?" "No." The word came out faster than she intended. She looked at the well. "It concerns me that I like it." Something shifted in the air between them. Not the bond, not yet, not the green-growing thing, but something older, something that existed between any two people on the verge of mattering to each other. The breathless, terrifying moment of realizing that a stranger had become someone whose absence you would notice. On the fourth night, she brought him something, a small notebook, palm-sized, bound in deep blue leather with her own hands. "For your wishes," she said. "So you don't forget them?" He held the notebook like it was made of glass. His thumb traced the spine, testing the stitching, and she watched his face change, the careful blankness dissolving into something raw and real. "This is beautiful," he said, pauses. "You made this." "It's what I do." "No." He looked at her with those smoke-gray eyes gone dark as storm clouds. "It's what you are." Her face heated. She looked away, down at the well, and noticed that the green tendril from the first night had thickened. It had crept along the base of the well in both directions, sending out leaves, and at its tip a single bud had formed. Tight and closed, but unmistakably there. "That wasn't here yesterday," she whispered. Alden followed her gaze. His expression shuddered. "Coralie, what is it? What's happening?" He was quiet for so long that the silence became its own answer. He knew. He knew something about the green-growing things and the well, and the way the air changed between them, and he was choosing not to tell her. "Not yet," he said finally. "Please, just not yet." She should have pressed. She should have demanded answers, but his voice held something fragile in it, something that sounded like a man standing on the edge of losing something he'd only just found, and she couldn't bring herself to push him over. "Okay," she said. "Not yet." 3 more nights. 3 more meetings at the well, the vine creeping further each time, small flowers beginning to open along its length, pale, star-shaped blossoms that released a scent like honeysuckle and rain. They sat closer now. His knee brushed hers sometimes. Once she fell asleep against his shoulder, and she woke to find his jacket draped over her, and his arm around her, and his cheek resting against her hair. And for one perfect, terrifying moment, she felt entirely safe. She pulled away. He let her. "Alden," she said on the 7th night. The vine had circled the entire well now, and the garden beds nearest to where they sat had begun to stir. Dormant roots sending up green shoots, dead-looking branches putting out buds. The garden was waking up, slowly, centered on the place where 2 people sat together in the dark. "I need to know. What's happening to this garden?" He stood, paced 3 steps away, then 3 steps back. His hand went to the back of his neck, pressing hard, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. "It's us," he said. "It's happening because of us." "What do you mean?" "I mean that what's growing here grows because we're here, together. It's a bond, a mate bond. It manifests differently for everyone and ours." He gestured at the vine, at the star-shaped flowers, at the garden slowly returning to life around them. "Ours grows things." Her heart hammered. Bond. Mate. The words landed in her chest like dropped stones. "You knew," she said. "You've known since the first night. Since you put your hand in mine and that vine pushed through the stone." His voice was raw. "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" He turned to face her, and the moonlight caught the anguish in his expression. Not hidden, not controlled, laid bare in a way that made her breath stop. "Because there's something else I haven't told you, and once I do, everything changes." Pauses. "My name is Alden Kavanaugh." The name hit her like cold water. Kavanaugh. The royal bloodline. The family that had ruled the kingdom for 9 generations. The Alpha King who lived in the palace that bordered this very garden, whose face she had never seen up close because he was a figure on a distant balcony. A name in proclamations. A presence felt, but never touched. "You're—" "Yes." She stood. Her legs were unsteady beneath her. The garden seemed to pulse around them, the vine's star-shaped flowers opening wider as if in response to the surge of emotion pouring through her, and she hated it. Hated that even her shock was making things bloom. "7 nights," she said. Her voice shook. "7 nights, Alden. You sat here and let me talk about my shop, and my dead father and what I want from my life, and the whole time you were the same man I've been every night." He stepped toward her. She stepped back. He stopped. "Coralie, look at me." She didn't want to. Looking at him meant seeing those smoke-gray eyes filled with something too large to dismiss, too earnest to distrust. Looking at him meant reconciling the man who'd brought her pastries, and held her hand, and listened to her talk about bookbinding with the same reverent attention other men reserve for matters of state. Reconciling that man with a crown, with a throne, with the weight of an entire kingdom. She looked anyway. "I didn't plan this," he said. His voice was low, urgent, stripped of every careful wall she'd watched him maintain. "I didn't come to this garden looking for a mate. I came here because I've been coming here since I was 8 years old, and it's the only place that still smells like her. Like my mother. Like the woman who planted every rose in this garden with her own hands before she was queen, when she was just someone who loved growing things." His voice caught. He steadied it. And then one night there was someone else here. Someone with ink on her fingers and grief in her eyes, and the courage to sit down next to a stranger in the dark and make a wish. And I felt the garden wake up. I felt it respond to us, to the two of us together, in a way it hasn't responded to anything in 11 years. I come to this garden because it's the only place I'm not the king, he said. I come here because my mother is here, in the stones, in the water, in the roots of everything she planted before she died. I come here because for 20 years I've been making the same wish, and I'd given up on it, and then you walked through the gate with ink on your fingers and copper in your pocket, and the well answered both of us at the same time. What wish? She whispered. Not to do this alone. The garden held its breath. The flowers held their petals open. The vine along the well pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Alive, impossibly alive. And Coralie stood 3 feet from the Alpha King and felt something crack inside her chest that she'd been holding together with nothing but stubbornness for 4 years. I can't, she said. Her eyes burned. I can't be the well, the bond, the garden. I'm a bookbinder. I repair broken spines and stitch pages together, and I have ink stains I can't get out. I'm not. You are exactly who you are, he said, and his voice broke on the last word. Voice breaks. That's what I wished for. Not a title. Not a political match. Not someone who would perform the role. Someone real. Someone who would sit with me in the dark and tell me the truth and not care about the rest of it. You don't know me. I know that you come to a ruined garden every night to tell a well what you're afraid to tell anyone else. I know you rebuild what burns down. I know you bound me a notebook with your own hands because you wanted me to remember my wishes, and no one— He stopped, pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. No one has given me something they made in 11 years. The silence between them was immense. Coralie looked at the garden, at the vine circling the well like a living crown, the star-shaped flowers glowing faintly in the moonlight, the beds that had been dormant for years now stirring with shoots and buds. Their bond, made visible, their connection, written in leaf and petal and root. If I walk away, she said quietly, does this stop? I don't know. His honesty was brutal. I think so. I think the garden goes back to sleep, and we go back to making the same wish to a well that can't answer it. She closed her eyes. The night air was cool against her face. She could smell the flowers, honeysuckle and rain and something underneath, something green and new, and she could feel him, his presence, the pull of the bond between them like a vine reaching toward light. She opened her eyes. I don't want a palace, she said. I'm not offering one. I don't want to be a queen. I'm not asking you to be. What are you asking? He held out his hand, the same gesture as the first night, palm up, open, offering, not demanding. His fingers were steady, but his jaw was tight, and she could see the effort it cost him to stand still and wait. Come back tomorrow night, he said. And the night after. Keep coming to the well, keep making your wish. Let me make mine. His voice dropped. And let us see what grows. She looked at his hand, at the ink on her own fingers, at the vine that had started with a single touch and was now breathing life back into a garden that had been forgotten. She placed her hand in his. The garden erupted. Not violently, not dramatically, but everywhere, all at once, like a held breath finally released. Buds opened along the crumbling archways, dormant rose canes flushed with new growth. The vine around the well thickened and bloomed, sending out a cascade of star-shaped flowers that filled the air with scent, and the old stone walls softened under a rush of new moss, vivid and green and impossibly alive. Alden's hand tightened around hers. His breath came in sharp. Coralie. Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer, like something sacred spoken aloud for the first time. She stepped closer. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his chest, close enough to count the darker flecks in those smoke-gray eyes. The bond between them sang through the garden, every new shoot and unfurling leaf an echo of the thing building in her chest. "I'm terrified," she told him. "So am I." "Good." She lifted her chin. "Then we're even." He kissed her, not desperately, not hungrily, slowly, deliberately, as though she were a page he was reading for the first time and wanted to remember every word. His free hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, and she felt the bloom erupt in her own body. Warmth spreading through her chest, her limbs, her fingers where they gripped the front of his jacket. The garden around them grew. She could hear it, impossibly, the soft green sound of things reaching toward light. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. His breathing was uneven. A petal had fallen into his hair, pale and star-shaped, and she reached up and brushed it away with fingers that trembled. "Same time tomorrow?" she whispered. He laughed, low and warm and real, the first time she'd heard him really laugh, and the sound made something bloom behind her ribs that no garden could contain. "Same time tomorrow," he said. 3 months later. The walled garden had become the most visited place in the capital. Word had spread slowly at first. The night watchman noticed the greenery appearing over the tops of the walls. Then a merchant passing by smelled the flowers through the crumbling stone. Then someone pushed open the crooked iron gate and found what had once been an abandoned ruin, now thick with life. Rose canes climbing the archways, heavy with blooms. Honeysuckle threading through the old stone. Beds of lavender and wild thyme lining paths that had been bare for a generation. No one could explain it. The royal gardeners inspected the soil and the water and the light and found nothing unusual. The scholars at the university wrote papers about microclimate anomalies and dormant root systems and spontaneous regrowth events. Coralie read the papers and laughed until her sides ached. She sat in her bindery, the new one, larger than the old, with tall windows that let in the morning light and shelves she'd built herself along every wall, and stitched the final signature of a commissioned journal. The leather was a deep amber color, warm as autumn, and the end papers were printed with a pattern of small star-shaped flowers that she'd designed herself. Her design, her press, her name on the spine. The shop smelled of leather and linen paste, and the faint sweetness of the dried honeysuckle she kept in a jar on the windowsill, a cutting from the garden, the first thing she'd ever taken from it that wasn't a wish. Her commissions had doubled since word spread that the royal bookbinder worked out of a small shop in the market quarter, but Coralie refused to move to the palace workshops. This was her space, her work. The tools were second-hand, and the press was rebuilt, and the ink stains on the floorboards were permanent, and every single thing in this room she had earned. The bell above her door chimed. She didn't look up. She knew the weight of those footsteps, knew the sound of them the way she knew the rhythm of her own hands at work, intimately, instinctively, by heart. Alden set a paper bag on the counter beside her elbow. 2 pastries from the bakery on Larkspur Street. Still warm. "You haven't eaten?" he said. I ate an apple." "An apple is not eating. An apple is a fruit. Fruit is food. Food is eating." He leaned down and pressed his mouth to the crown of her head, and where his lips touched her hair, the small potted fern on her windowsill unfurled a new frond with a satisfied little shiver. She looked at it, looked at him. He was watching the fern with an expression of resigned amusement. "Your Majesty," she said, "you are disrupting my fern. Your fern was already disrupted. I'm merely encouraging it." He came around the counter and leaned against the edge of it, facing her. The leather jacket was gone today. He wore a dark wool coat, well-made but unadorned, and the copper ring on his right hand was the only thing that marked him as anything other than a man visiting his partner's shop on a slow morning. "The council wants to formally restore the walled garden, open it to the public, install benches, plant more beds. And they want to name it after my mother." Coralie set down her needle. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, instinctively, and on the shelf behind her head a dormant orchid put out a single, improbable bloom. "She would love that," Coralie said. His throat worked. "I think she would." "What about the well?" "The well stays." His thumb traced the ink stain on her index finger, the one that never fully washed out. The one he'd told her once was his favorite thing about her hands. "I told them the well is not negotiable. Because it's ancient and historically significant. Because it's ours." He lifted her hand and kissed the ink stain. Whispers. "I made a wish at that well every night for 20 years, Coralie. And every single night it was the same wish. And then you walked through a broken gate with copper in your pocket and it came true." Her eyes stung. She blinked hard. "You know, for a king, you're remarkably sentimental. I prefer devoted. I prefer ridiculous." He smiled. The real one, the one that transformed his entire face, that turned the sharp angles soft and made those smoke-gray eyes go warm as hearth fire. The one she'd first seen on the 7th night at the well, when she'd made a joke about his terrible posture, and he'd laughed so hard he'd startled an owl out of the garden wall. The one that was hers. "I made a wish at the kingdom's well every night," she told him, because she could now. Because the wanting had stopped being a wound and become something alive, something growing, something that bloomed wherever they stood together. He leaned his forehead against hers. So did I. Outside the bindery window, the city moved and hummed and carried on. Inside, the orchid bloomed and the fern unfurled, and two people who had found each other in the ruins of a garden stood with their hands intertwined and their foreheads touching, and the bond between them grew the way all real things grow, quietly, persistently, rooted in something deeper than either of them could name. And in the center of the walled garden, in the heart of the capital, the well stood as it always had. Ancient, patient, full of coins and whispered truths, its stones wrapped in a living crown of star-shaped flowers that bloomed in every season, defying every scholar who tried to explain them. Some things don't need explaining. Some things just need two people brave enough to show up in the dark and tell the truth.